On Your Side tonight with Jamie Bowl starts now. Small businesses are critical to every community.
We have over 900,000 small businesses in the state, and they employ 1.7 million people.
But now many are hurting.
This is just an unprecedented, brutal time right now.
You ask the questions, we found the right people to answer them.
If you're self-employed, you may apply to the Paycheck Protection Program.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Tonight we are going to focus on your job and your bosses and the government's efforts to save it. Let's talk more about it tonight. About half of the people in this country work for a small business. And if you include those who are self-employed, about 98% of those small businesses employ fewer than 20 people. And right now, a lot of them are hanging on by a thread. It is a challenging time. Now, there is an array of programs, federal, state, and local, designed to save those companies and those jobs. But it's been confusing and time-consuming trying to sort through it all as you try to stay afloat. So tonight, we have pulled together a panel to try to walk through some of this. We have Thomas Stith, District Director of the Small Business Administration, Janet Lebar, President and CEO of the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, Mecklenburg County Commissioner Mark Jerrell, and Charlotte City Councilman Tariq Bohkari.
Janet, can I start with you? Give me sort of the 30,000-foot view of all of this. What's the mood of the business community right now?
You know, what we're hearing from our investors and businesses all across Charlotte and the region is just that uncertainty. We're hearing from some of our businesses that, you know, they think this could last up to 6 months. So, you know, when you don't have any idea of how you're going to manage your business, how you're going to make payroll, how you're going to keep your employees working and innovating through this, you know, what does that mean for them and how do you plan and manage your finances accordingly?
Thomas, as a baseline for the Small Business Administration, what's your role in normal times? And just touch on how important small business is to our community.
We have over 900,000 small businesses in the state, and they employ 1.7 million people. So they are a critical part of our economy and our community. In typical times, SBA's role is to support the start, growth, and expansion of small businesses, and unfortunately, in disaster situations, recovery. So now, obviously, we're very heavily focused on recovery and providing economic support for small business throughout the state.
Mark, let me talk about the county for a second. The county initiatives right now, where do they stand? What programs are being put forward?
Thanks again for having me. And this is just such an important conversation. The programs, the county we were able to stand up 2 different programs. The Small Business Emergency Stabilization Fund, where business owners with 50 employees or less will be able to qualify for funding $5,000 and $35,000, which is again, intended to ensure that there's a little short-term relief and some cash infusion. And also we have the micro-lending stabilization fund for those business owners that have employees of 5 or less. And so there's a $10,000 limit there. Some other parameters, but we tried to make the program, we streamlined the application and made sure that the documentation was not going to be prohibitive, particularly to our small businesses that may not be able to get their hands on the needed documentation in the traditional lending sense.
Tariq, what are you hearing from the business community and what is the city doing right now?
This is just an unprecedented, brutal time right now where all business, but particularly small business, is waking up in a frantic state every day to try to hang on for another day, to hang on for another week. Tonight, we're voting on a $6.5 million stimulus package locally. 2 million rental and mortgage relief, 1.8 million utility and security deposit assistance, 1.3 million homelessness, and 1 million goes to small business. So, you know, we have to ask ourselves very tough questions right now that are not popular. One of which is, are we doing something because it makes an impact, or are we doing something to say we did something? And I don't know the answer, but I do know that throwing 15 pebbles in the ocean is not something that's worth our time. We should be figuring out how to make a huge impact.
And of course, the big program federally for small businesses is the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. Banks are offering low-interest loans of up to $10 million. If 75% of that money in the first 8 weeks goes to payroll, keeping employees, the loan will be forgiven. One of the issues, though, has been the process.
Janet, from who you're hearing from, is it working? Are people getting through?
I think there's a long line of folks who are waiting to see still. I know that we certainly appreciate everything that the federal government is doing on this. I think we also know that there's more than 30 million small businesses in the country, and that the current package that was proposed and now passed may not reach everybody. So I think people are still, again, on those lines of uncertainty, still waiting to see.
Mark, from the county perspective, what are you hearing from your constituents as far as the responsiveness of the banks in this program?
I think what happened was, I think the communication initially to a lot of small business owners thought that they could go in any bank, and apply and move forward. Some of the feedback that people got immediately was that we're going to service our customers first. And so if you did not have a relationship with a particular bank, there were a lot of issues that were created, which caused a lot of panic from my constituents.
I think we're building the plane while we're flying it. I've heard that said multiple times over the last week or two. So, I mean, who knows at this point? What I would say is a first thank you to the SBA, to our friends in the federal government. You guys have moved faster than I've ever seen anybody at that level move before, and you're approaching it in an amazing way. But I'll also plead with you right now from the bottom ground floor. Thomas, this one goes to you, buddy. Right now, banks are still being a bit hamstrung. The fintechs out there need to be able to play in this space. And when you think about what their power is, they have cutting edge technology. They have access to data on borrowers to assess risk, and in a lot of cases, bring down those default rates to single percentages, accept online applications, make these lending decisions in minutes, and wire the borrowers their money in less than 48 hours, all remotely. It's exactly what's needed right now.
Thomas, you want to respond to that?
No, I think that's very accurate. It's a historic effort. We have not seen this level of economic response from the federal level ever. And we're a little past a week of passing, a little over plus a week of passing a part of this component, the PPP, a $349 billion initiative. And so there are the growing pains, if you please, the guidance to the lending institutions. And I concur. We're looking at many ways to expedite the disbursement of funds while balancing the review and ensuring that it's going to the right folks.
Let me ask you this, because there's so many different programs out there. If you qualify for one, does that make you ineligible for others? Or should people just sort of throw everything at the wall and apply for everything?
On the federal level, with our economic injury disaster loan and the Paycheck Protection Program, you can apply for both. So you're not excluded. You cannot utilize the proceeds for the same use. But businesses, I encourage them to evaluate both, and if they want to apply for both, they can. It's just a matter of use of proceeds.
I think there might have been some confusion around, if you do one, can you do the other? And we found out that that you can. And in regards to the county program, we had robust discussion around this to ensure that we were not going to look at this as quote unquote double dipping, but allow business owners to apply for as many programs as humanly possible to stand up. I know earlier we said that a lot of business owners think that this may last 6 months, but to a large extent, the impact to small business is going to be much longer than 6 months. Also, a lot of business models have to change because of this. So there are going to be decisions on when we get back, when we're normalized. Do you keep this existing model, or do you go back to a previous model?
I made a plea to our partners at the SBA for change. Let me make a plea now on the other side of that coin to the small business owners that are out there right now. If you are applying for these things like PPP and other programs in the hopes that you will weather this storm and pop out the other end and be able to resume business as normal in a couple weeks or a couple months, I strongly beg you, do not do that. Innovate now. Use these lifelines as the ability to kind of design your model to live in a world that's half virtual, half physical, whatever it is. Because if you're sitting around and waiting and you hope these life rafts just pop you out on the other side, you're going to be disappointed.
I think it's incredibly important that we as a community also make sure that we're doing what we can, whether that's takeout from these places, trying to continue to do what we can to patronize these businesses, because as Tariq said, a lot of folks aren't going to make it out on the other side. And if we have anything to do with it here in the Charlotte community, I think that's upon us to really make sure that we see how do we continue to cultivate some of that community gathering that takes place in our smaller businesses.
And some fascinating insight. Now, last week we asked small business owners, what questions do you have? We posed several of those to Thomas Stith of the Small Business Administration.
Thomas, one of the questions we got from a viewer, his name is Al, runs a small business here in town. One of the things he was struggling with was, when am I going to get some notification from the bank that I've A, qualified, and then B, how quickly will I get the funds? What would you tell him?
I would say that, as we've commented, that the process is improving each day. That notification will, for a Paycheck Protection Program, come from the bank itself. And our anticipation is not a specific date range, but fairly quickly.
A question I got from several people, and I'll kind of do my best here to just sort of condense them into one. One, for example, was Sandy. She says she owns a yoga studio. Our employees, our 1099 contractors, do those folks qualify for PPP? If not, what other programs are out there for those who are contractors or on 1099s?
In that specific example, the owner of the yoga studio would qualify. The individual 1099 or contract individuals are eligible individually. The yoga entity could not count that as their payroll, but both the contract individuals and the owner are eligible for PPP. The yoga studio is also eligible for the economic injury disaster loan.
I want to be really clear about one thing here, because like I said, we got several questions about this. And Thomas, help me out. If you are self-employed, what program do you qualify for?
You qualify for both. If you're self-employed, you may apply to the Paycheck Protection Program, identifying your own personal salary, or they can work with you through your financials to see what your compensation is. And you're also eligible for the economic injury disaster loan. So sole proprietors, and one thing we haven't touched on for both initiatives as well are faith-based organizations or nonprofits in general, and that's very critical as well. But you're qualified for both, are eligible for both.
I did have a question about that. Marlene, in fact, asked, she says, a deacon at our church, and was asked the question if our small church would qualify for the small business loan that could turn into a grant if we don't let any staff go. You're saying, yes, they would qualify.
Right, and that is the mission of the PPP, that if they utilize those proceeds during those first 8 weeks of receiving the funds, that amount would reduce the amount of the loan. So yes, faith-based organizations, churches, houses of worship are eligible.
What about rent? Are there rental assistance programs available?
As a part of the PPP, rent, lease payments, utilities are allowable use that will become forgivable. They can only be up to 25% of the expenditures during that first 8 weeks.
Yeah, remember 25% for rent, et cetera, 75% for payroll. That's how that can then become a grant. Let us know what you think. Let us know. Use the hashtag OYS Tonight on Twitter or email askjamie@wbtv.com. We can't thank those who participated enough for helping us answer some of those questions. Coming up next.